When two guards tried to remove a black Marine from his son's graduation, nobody expected what came next. 6 Navy SEALs, scattered through the crowd like quiet shadows, stood up, didn't speak, didn't blink, just rose. And in that single, unified movement, the entire room froze. But hours before that silent standoff stopped the ceremony in its tracks, Solomon Dryden had pulled into the rear parking lot of Elmridge High, just another father trying to witness a moment that would never come again. The building looked like every other small-town high school in Texas, sun-faded red bricks, flags waving like they'd seen too much weather, and kids lingering near the gym doors, hyped, distracted, alive. The lot was packed with minivans and sedans and 1 or 2 pickup trucks too clean to actually haul anything. Solomon parked his black Dodge Charger near the chain-link fence, his wife's favorite car even now, 2 years after she passed, and stepped out, his deep blue Marine uniform catching the late afternoon light. His boots were shined not to impress, but because he never did anything halfway. Discipline was muscle memory now. The air was thick with Texas heat and sentiment. Parents shuffled toward the entrance in their Sunday best. Teenagers with glitter signs, grandparents hobbling with walkers, someone already crying. Solomon straightened his jacket and took a quiet breath. His posture alone set him apart. Upright, unshaken, the kind of stillness you earn through fire. He opened the car door once more and reached into the glove box. Out came a small, worn photograph. His late wife holding Tyron as a newborn. A small tear had split one edge, but her smile still burned through time. He slid it into his breast pocket. "I promised you," he whispered, "I wouldn't miss it." And then he walked. Every step toward that school gym was intentional, not fast, not slow, just steady. Inside, chaos ruled. Metal folding chairs in tight rows. Bleachers overflowing with restless energy. The air smelled of popcorn and wax, a mix of celebration and old janitor sweat. Solomon flashed his printed ticket at the door. A volunteer in a headset nodded and pointed toward the 3rd row on the left, family seating. "Appreciate it," Solomon said, voice calm, eyes already scanning. He made his way past the murmuring crowd, a few heads turning. Some recognized the uniform and quickly looked away. Others stared longer, unreadable. One woman smiled and whispered to her husband. Solomon didn't react. He'd worn this uniform for years, across oceans, through war zones, in cities that cheered and towns that didn't. He knew the weight it carried, and the resistance that sometimes followed. He found his seat, adjusted it without complaint. A flimsy plastic chair, slightly crooked, but it held. The stage was decorated in oversized silver letters, Class of 2024. Banners fluttered, school board members shuffled papers. Solomon's eyes swept the student rows. Tyron was somewhere in the crowd. 18 years old now, tall like him, but with his mother's soft brown eyes. In another world, she'd be fixing his tie for the 3rd time this morning. Solomon remembered the first time he held Tyron. Dirt still under his nails, fresh off a plane from Okinawa. 4 days leave. Just enough time to witness a miracle. Now here he was. Time had cheated them both. The lights buzzed, chairs scraped, programs rustled. But none of it touched Solomon. His focus was unshakable. The stage, the rows of students, and the photo pressed against his chest. And then the music. That ceremonial march that signals something big and unforgettable. The crowd rose. Solomon did too, shoulders squared, arms at his sides. He didn't place a hand over his heart during the anthem. He didn't need to. His entire presence was a salute. He thought of his wife. She would have cried the whole time. She would have brought tissues, even though she'd pretend she didn't need them. Then, just as the anthem faded, 2 men began making their way down the side aisle. Not police. Not military. Harlan Security Services. The badges on their black polos made that clear. Cargo pants. Radios. Earpieces. One was short and stocky with a shaved head and a grimace. The other tall and thin, chewing gum like it was a job. Solomon clocked them instantly. But he didn't move. Didn't flinch. Combat teaches you stillness. How silence can speak louder than force. The short one leaned in just enough. "Excuse me, sir," he said, voice low. "We're gonna need you to come with us." Solomon turned his head slowly. "Is there a problem?" The tall one stepped up. "Yeah. This section's for families of graduating seniors. Solomon reached calmly into his jacket and produced the same printed ticket he'd already shown. Third row left side. Family seating. Confirmed. The short guard didn't even glance at it. We got told it's full. Solomon didn't blink. It was full when I sat down, too. You want to tell me who gave that order? The taller one shifted, unprepared for the calm authority behind those words. Look, it's not a big deal, he said, eyes flicking around. There's some extra seats in the back. Let's not make this anything it doesn't have to be. Solomon's jaw tightened. His voice dropped just slightly, but it hit like steel. I drove 8 hours to watch my son walk across that stage. I'll be sitting right here. Around them, the mood shifted. Eyes turned. A woman nudged her husband and nodded toward the commotion. A teenager angled their phone, recording, maybe live streaming. The short guard straightened up, growing more rigid, scanning the room. Sir, I'm gonna ask one more time. You can ask all day, Solomon cut in, now sharper. I'm not moving. The tall one sucked his teeth. Maybe you'd be more comfortable in the back. That's all we're saying. And there it was. Solomon heard it. Not the words, but the meaning under them. That wasn't about policy. That was about place. About the unspoken rules that try to decide who belongs up front and who doesn't. He'd heard versions of that phrase his whole life. On porches, in offices, at base cafeterias. That maybe you'd be more comfortable always meant the same thing. We don't want you here. He stared at them both. Didn't say another word. He didn't need to. The weight of that stare was enough to make the taller guard shift his stance. The shorter one adjusted his radio, muttering something low into the mic. Whatever was being said, it wasn't working. Solomon wasn't moving. The people around him weren't buying it. The tension in the room coiled tighter. And then, from the far sides of the bleachers, 6 figures stood. Quiet. Almost in sync. Navy SEALs in civilian clothes, former teammates, perhaps friends, maybe strangers who recognized one of their own being disrespected. They didn't yell. They didn't walk over. They just stood. And the whole gym froze. The security guards paused, caught suddenly in the gaze of trained warriors. Nobody had to say a word. Solomon stayed seated. The photo still against his chest. The message was loud enough. You do not touch this man. Not today. Not ever. And that moment, more than the speeches, the banners, the balloons, was what Tyron would remember most. That his father showed up. That he stood his ground. And that the room finally stood with him. He nodded once. No words, no gestures, just that firm, unshakable signal of acknowledgement. The woman beside him had offered silent solidarity, and Solomon Dryden didn't need more. He didn't want to make a scene. He didn't want to draw attention. All he wanted was to watch his son graduate, like any father would. But the guards weren't finished. The tall one leaned in again, lowering his voice like he was sharing some grand secret. Look, if you've got a problem, take it up with the school office. We just follow orders. Solomon turned toward him, his face steady. You got a name, son? The guard blinked, thrown off. It's Officer Malley. Not officer, Solomon corrected calmly. You're private security. The other one, the shorter guard, stepped in, his chest puffed like a rooster, his badge reading Garvin. All right, that's enough. If you don't stand up. But he didn't get to finish. Because that's when the back gym doors clicked open. 6 men entered. No uniforms, no show of force, no need for either. They drifted in like shadows taking form. One by one. Different entrances. Different rows. Different sides of the room. But they were the same. Same walk. Same eyes. Same readiness. Like wolves pretending to be part of the flock, but unable to hide the quiet power in their stillness. Solomon didn't need to look. He knew exactly who they were. The guards didn't. Not yet. And they were about to learn. He kept his eyes fixed on the stage, but something inside him clicked into place, a quiet switch he didn't flip often. Not unless it was necessary. Not unless a line had been crossed. It wasn't anger. Not yet. But it was focus. The kind born in fire, sharpened through dust and cooled in blood. The kind that didn't flinch. The guards hovered. They weren't here to enforce rules anymore. They were here to remind a black man where they thought he belonged. But Solomon had walked in places where reminders like that came with mines underfoot, and the sound of snipers breathing behind ruined walls. This was a school gym with folding chairs. A student name was called from the stage. Applause followed, but it was polite, distracted. No one near Solomon was paying attention to the ceremony anymore. Their eyes were elsewhere, watching the moment swell like thunderclouds behind calm skies. Mally tried again, voice tighter now, as if he sensed something slipping from his control. I'm trying to do you a favor here, all right? This doesn't need to get ugly. Solomon's eyes flicked to him. You don't have that kind of favor to offer. Mally drew back, momentarily unsure. Garvin, on the other hand, was too hot-headed for silence. His hand hovered near his radio, lips thinning. 3 rows back, a man stood. No one noticed at first. He didn't raise his voice, didn't wave. He simply stood, crossed his arms, and stared. Clean-shaven, jaw set, eyes like glass cutters. He sat back down quietly, keeping his gaze forward. Another man rose. Opposite side of the gym. Same stance. Calm. Absolute. Then a third. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. Solomon had led these men through darkness, across gunfire, through storms made of lead and mud. They had a language deeper than words. Garvin leaned down again. His voice held a flicker of threat now. You're making this into a situation. Solomon turned slowly. His voice was lower now, colder. And you're not listening. Garvin's hand twitched toward the radio. Then another voice, calm, clean, and sharp as a blade in velvet, cut through the tension. Is there a reason this man's being bothered? 10 feet away stood a tall man in a fitted black coat over a gray shirt. Salt and pepper beard. Steady eyes. No fear. No uncertainty. Creed Marston. The one Solomon had dragged through 200 yards of hell in Kandahar. Garvin turned, blinking. Who are you? Creed didn't answer. He stepped forward. I asked you a question. Mally raised a hand, trying to regain control. Sir, we've got this under control. No, Creed said, voice flat, eyes fixed. You don't. Another man rose in the bleachers. And another. Now there were 4. Solomon remained still, but the air around him had changed. You could feel it in your spine. The temperature of the room had dropped, not in cold, but in tension. A waiting kind of silence. A sacred kind. You're embarrassing yourselves, Creed said, stepping closer. And you're one breath away from making this worse. Garvin looked at Mally. They didn't speak, but it was clear now. They hadn't expected this. Not the presence. Not the power. Not the quiet defiance shaped by real battles. I don't care what your orders were, Creed said. You don't touch that man. You don't ask him to move. You don't ask again. The silence tightened. Respect. Not fear. A mother near the front row lowered her phone. A teacher hesitated mid-sentence. A student in a cap and gown looked back, confused. Solomon finally looked at Creed. Just a nod. Small, but heavy with meaning. It wasn't thanks. It wasn't surrender. It was recognition. Creed's eyes softened just slightly before he stepped back and returned to his seat. Arms folded once more. But the tension didn't leave, because Solomon's mind wasn't in that gym anymore. It was 15 years back. Kandahar. Late afternoon. The sun there didn't set. It fell like a hammer, turning sand into rust, air into steel. He had just finished briefing his squad when the blast hit. A roadside IED blew their convoy apart. The lead Humvee flipped like a toy, metal screaming. Then came the bullets, sharp, precise, unrelenting. Solomon didn't hesitate. No time for fear. He ducked behind what was left of a door frame. Smoke filled the air like ghosts. But he saw 6 men pinned. Burning wreckage. Chaos. One of them was already crawling, pulling another man by the vest. Creed Marston. 3 months into deployment. Bullet through the thigh. Solomon ran. No call for backup. No plan. Just instinct. He slid behind a blown axle. Creed looked up, gasping, blood streaking his face. You're bleeding, Creed muttered. You noticed, Solomon said. He grabbed the straps of the wounded man beside him, Enrique Soto, and began to pull. Creed pushed from behind, every inch a scream of pain. Divas. Solomon shouted. Creed pointed weakly. Left side, under the hood. And there he was. Pinned. A young SEAL. Trapped under engine block. Screaming for help. Too far. Too late. But Solomon didn't stop. Because that's what Marines do. Even when the world says sit down. Even when the room tells you to move. Even when no one else stands for you. Except the men who bled beside you. And back in that gym in Elm Ridge, Texas, the stage lights glinted off the badge on Garvin's belt. The moment cracked, not with noise, but with understanding. Power didn't sit in a radio. It sat in stillness. And Solomon Dryden wasn't going anywhere. Solomon leaned close to Creed and said, "You keep low and move when I move." Creed gave a tight nod, and that was the moment he truly grasped what real leadership looked like. Not in commands, but in clarity during chaos. Solomon sprinted again. A blur of resolve across dirt and flame. His foot crunched down gravel, then something softer, something wrong. Bone. He didn't flinch. He couldn't. He slid behind the mangled wreckage where divas lay trapped, crouched low and gripped the edge of the twisted hood with both hands. It wouldn't budge. "Gunny, don't," divas shouted. "I'm good. I'm good. You're not staying here." Solomon braced one foot, dug deep, and lifted. His shoulders strained, ribs screaming, metal groaning under the effort. But it moved. Just enough. Divas yanked his leg free with a howl. Together, they collapsed backward, then scrambled for the ridgeline, dragging themselves through dust and blood. Gunfire ripped overhead. Creed returned with Soto, limping on his good leg. Behind him, Lim and Horton emerged from smoke like shadows with rifles at the ready, faces smeared with soot and sweat. When the shooting stopped, there were no cheers. No high-fives. Just 6 men breathing hard, alive. Solomon was the last to fall back, watching the perimeter until the dust settled, and the medevac whirred into view. He didn't speak for a long time afterward. But the others never forgot. From that day forward, if Solomon ever called, no matter the place, the hour, the reason, they would be there. Now in the present-day gym, Creed sat still. His hands were folded, but his jaw clenched as he watched the guards still hovering near Solomon. This wasn't Afghanistan. But promises made under fire didn't fade in peacetime. And watching Solomon get harassed in front of a school stage, just for wanting to see his son graduate, lit a fuse inside Creed. Another Navy SEAL, Javier Meeks, slipped into the gym and sat 4 rows back. Then came Zachary Wells, quietly positioning himself by the right side bleachers. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Solomon noticed them both with a single glance. That was all it took. The ceremony continued on the surface. Names echoed across the sound system. And families clapped politely, some too loudly, trying to disguise the tension that now clung to the air like smoke. But eyes were drifting. No one was really looking at the stage anymore. They were watching the 3rd row, left side, where Solomon Drayton sat, a quiet, immovable figure. As 2 guards hovered, unsure of their next step, Garvin, the shorter of the 2, glanced toward a school official near the front. She was mouthing words, gesturing at them to back down. But Garvin shook his head. He wasn't ready to let it go. He'd started something, and his ego didn't know how to stop. Mally shifted uncomfortably, chewing gum like it might give him courage. He wasn't walking away either. "Sir," Garvin said louder now. "This is your last warning." Solomon turned to face him fully. To do what exactly? Garvin stepped closer, belt brushing Solomon's knee. "To stop making a scene. We don't want trouble. Just move to the back." "You're the only one making a scene," Solomon replied, calm but cold. Garvin's face twisted. "You think wearing that uniform makes you better than everybody else? This is a high school, man. Not your base." The words hit like a brick wall. A hush fell. A girl in pigtails froze mid-squirm. A dad with a camcorder paused mid-zoom. Even Mally stepped back slightly, like the weight of Garvin's outburst surprised him. Solomon didn't flinch. He breathed once. "You need to walk away." Garvin didn't. Instead, his hand drifted toward his belt, not on a weapon, but close enough to make a statement. That's when Creed stood. No yelling. No threats. Just a quiet shift of presence, like the moment a tide changes direction. "If you touch him," Creed said, his voice even, "you'll answer to me." Garvin turned. "Who the hell are you?" Creed stepped into the aisle, slow and steady. "The man telling you this ends now." A school board member whispered to the principal. The assistant principal rose, whispering into her walkie. Finally, school staff started to realize this was spiraling beyond their control. More SEALs stood up. No cue, no plan, just instinct. They were scattered throughout the gym, but their timing was synchronized like a metronome. Calm, silent, unwavering. Garvin's bravado cracked. He looked around. These weren't angry parents. These were men shaped by the kind of crucible Garvin couldn't fathom. "You've got two choices," Creed said. "Walk away now, or watch this go someplace you don't want." Mally whispered, "Let's just back off, man." But Garvin hesitated. Solomon said quietly, "Don't waste your breath. He already made his decision." Creed's tone dropped a final time. "Don't mistake silence for weakness." That broke it. Garvin stepped back, reluctantly. His hand dropped from his belt. His cheeks were flushed, but he knew he was outnumbered and outclassed. The principal rushed over and murmured something sharp to both guards. They nodded stiffly and moved toward the exit, eyes on the floor. They didn't look at anyone on their way out. Solomon exhaled, steady, not shaken. Creed returned to his seat. The others remained standing, alert but silent. Tyron Drayton, Solomon's son, had seen the entire exchange. He stood in the lineup of graduates, hands clenched at his sides. He tried to focus on the ceremony. The whispers, the laughter, the girl with bright braids beside him, the boy whose gown wouldn't stay on, but he couldn't. He'd noticed the guards moving in right after the anthem. At first, he thought maybe they were helping someone find a seat. But then he saw the way they stood too close. The way his father sat, still composed, but locked in. Tyron had seen that look before. When he was 12 and came home crying because of something said in school. His dad didn't raise his voice then either. He just sat beside him, silent, strong, unbending. From his place in the lineup, Tyron couldn't hear the words, but he read the body language. He saw the moment Creed stood, the way others followed, and somehow, even from across the gym, Tyron knew those weren't just other parents. They were there for his father. And that changed everything. The ceremony continued. Names were called. Diplomas were handed out. Flashbulbs burst like fireworks. But now the moment belonged to something else, something bigger than a cap and gown. It belonged to a promise kept. A silent vow between men forged in fire and honored in peace. Solomon stayed until the very last name. And when Tyron crossed the stage, he looked out into the crowd, not for the camera, not for the crowd, but for one man in the third row left side. And there he was. Still. Steady. Unshaken. Home. The man didn't just know his father. He moved like he'd trained with him. Like they'd spent years reading each other's signals in silence. Tyron could see it in every step, every glance. That man didn't stand up for show. He stood because something primal clicked into place. Creed wasn't reacting to disrespect. He was responding to a bond, a vow, an unspoken rule forged far from school gyms and graduation banners. Then another man stood. And then another. Quiet, calm, no posturing. No one shouted. But the room shifted. The air, once filled with balloons and parents fumbling with phone cameras, thickened. People stopped clapping mid-palm. Eyes veered from the stage to row 3, where Solomon Drayton sat like a carved monument. 2 guards loomed over him. Not moving, but not retreating either. They were frozen, not by fear, but by the unmistakable change in the room's gravity. Tyron's heart pounded, not from fear, but from something deeper. Fire, pride, rage. It pulsed in him all at once. He'd heard stories about his father growing up, but not the kind that came with medals or magazine covers. Solomon never bragged. He'd tell you about a teammate's joke before he ever mentioned the mission. Tyron knew about the box in the garage labeled Kandahar, never opened. The scar across his father's back, seen once when a shirt slipped. The dusty Christmas card with 3 names and no return address. But now the faces were here. The names had stood. Right in the middle of a graduation ceremony. Without a word, they'd revealed themselves. As if they'd never stopped watching Solomon's 6. Tyron blinked against the sudden burn in his eyes. Not now. Not here. He wouldn't cry, no matter how much that fire in his chest clawed its way up. He clenched his jaw and focused forward. The line of students moved slowly again. A few more names. Scattered applause. One girl's shoes squeaked on the floor, pulling giggles from the rows. It was like someone hit play again after a tense pause. But the room wasn't the same. It didn't belong to banners and balloons anymore. It belonged to something else now. Something older. Heavier. An assistant principal tapped Tyron's shoulder. She whispered something. He didn't hear it. He nodded anyway. A student beside him leaned over, voice soft, wide-eyed. "That your dad?" Tyron didn't answer. He didn't have to. Everyone in that gym had seen it. Across the room, Creed remained standing. He didn't shift or glance around. He wasn't there for optics. His entire posture said one thing. This man is not alone. The other SEALs stood with the same quiet dignity, spaced across the gym like pillars. Their silence was louder than any microphone. And Solomon? Still seated. Still calm. Eyes forward. Hands resting. He hadn't blinked when Garvin insulted him. Hadn't risen when the belt buckle brushed his knee. Hadn't wavered when the tension hit its peak. He just stayed there, anchored, rooted. Watching the stage with the focus of a soldier who knew exactly where his mission was. His son. Parents who had been quiet all ceremony were clapping louder now with each name. Some of them were trying to fill the space left by their silence earlier. Others were moved by something they couldn't explain, like they'd witnessed a sacred ritual hidden in plain sight. Something ancient. Something real. Solomon didn't acknowledge the shift. He didn't nod or smirk. He simply watched. Then the line shifted again. Tyron was next. He felt the blood pound behind his ears. His palms were damp. His breathing shallow. The girl in front of him turned and smiled nervously. "You ready?" He smiled back. "More than you know." 3 names ahead. 2. 1. Solomon leaned forward, ever so slightly. His eyes locked onto his son like a scope to target. Focused. Steady. Not clapping for every student. Because in that moment, there was only one. The announcer paused, adjusted the mic, cleared her throat. Tyron Drayton. The name cracked through the gym like a match strike. For half a second, silence. Then the room erupted. But it wasn't the usual scattered, uneven applause. It was rhythmic. Purposeful. Deep. The 6 SEALs clapped in perfect unison. Not loud for effect, but deliberate. Forceful. Reverent. A warrior's ovation. Each hand hitting each palm was like a drumbeat echoing across the gym walls. Tyron stepped forward slowly, chin high, chest open. Not cocky. Just ready. He crossed the stage without looking at the crowd, until he took his diploma. Then he turned. He searched the rows until his eyes found the one that mattered. Solomon. Still seated. Still silent. But when his son's eyes met his, he gave the smallest smile, a subtle curve of the lips that held years. Pride. Pain. Patience. Everything. Tyron nodded once. The kind of nod you only give when words would get in the way. Then he stepped off the stage. The applause didn't stop. Some parents stood. A few wiped tears. Not out of sentimentality, but because they just felt something raw. Something they didn't have a name for but knew they'd never forget. Solomon leaned back. He let it all roll over him. He wasn't a man to cry in public. Not because he didn't feel, but because he'd spent too many years learning how not to show it. But something loosened inside him then. Not sorrow. Not nostalgia. Just release. That thing warriors carry. The unspoken weight. It shifted. Not gone. But lighter. The ceremony continued, but everyone knew the climax had passed. Every student after Tyron walked in the echo of what had happened. Not because it went viral. Not because it was dramatic. But because it was real. And the real always lingers. When the final name was called, the class tossed caps. Cheers and chaos returned. Balloons danced. Phones clicked like gunfire. Students hugged as if they hadn't seen each other in years. But Solomon didn't move. Not yet. He watched the sea of red and white robes swirl past him. His eyes tracked Tyron as he disappeared into the back hallway with classmates. A teacher gave him a high five. Another wrapped him in a quick hug. Then in the middle of it all, Tyron paused. He turned. Just once. and looked back. Solomon met his son's eyes. It wasn't long, barely a breath, but it held everything. When they finally met outside the gym, there were no speeches, no camera-ready lines. Tyron walked straight into his father's arms, and for the first time in years, Solomon held him not like a soldier preparing his son for the world, but like a father allowing himself to be proud. No medals, no mission, just a man, and his son, and a circle, not complete, but closer than ever. The silent salute, a story of strength, legacy, and manhood. The last name had been called. The gym still buzzed with residual applause and the crinkling rustle of balloons and folding chairs, but most eyes were already elsewhere, on hugs, flowers, photos. Tyron Drayton had stepped off the stage 10 minutes ago, diploma folder in hand, but the echoes of what happened during his walk lingered in the air like a whisper too loud to ignore. Solomon Drayton hadn't said a word since that moment. He hadn't needed to. His expression, controlled, calm, and quietly defiant, had spoken louder than any outburst ever could. The crowd was thinning now. People shuffled out in small waves, parents clutching gift bags, kids dragging chairs. Some families laughed with relief. Others cried from pride. Solomon stood slowly. His joints ached, not just from age, but from years of action, service, and sacrifice. He rolled his shoulders, stretching the stiffness out of his back. Creed walked over from the opposite row, his face unreadable beneath the brim of his cap. He didn't speak at first, just scanned the room and then looked Solomon in the eye. "You all right?" he asked quietly. Solomon nodded once. "I've been through worse." Creed's lips twitched into something between a smirk and a sigh. "Yeah, but it still shouldn't have happened." "No," Solomon agreed, voice low and grounded. "It shouldn't have." A third man approached, Javier Meeks, one of the 6 SEALs who had stood like statues when the guards dared try to escort Solomon out. "We tried to stay low-key," Meeks said. "But when that guy reached for his belt..." Solomon raised a hand gently, cutting him off. "You did what needed to be done. That was enough." The 3 men stood there, the last ones in the gym, their silence thick with history. No medals, no orders, no flash. Just an old bond forged in deserts and jungles and dark corners of the world few would ever see. Finally, Solomon broke the stillness. "I want to see my boy." Outside, the sun poured down hard on the pavement, casting long shadows across the back lot of the school. Students were scattered in little circles, some posing for photos, some throwing their caps again just for the social media shot, others searching for their families in the chaos. Tyron stood near the flagpole. His graduation gown was unzipped, flapping slightly in the breeze. His diploma folder was in one hand, and his phone was in the other, but his focus snapped the moment he saw his father emerge from the building. Their eyes met. And just like that, the noise around Tyron faded. He stepped away from his classmates and walked toward his father. They met halfway. "You good?" Tyron asked. Solomon gave a short nod. "You." Tyron exhaled through his nose. "They tried to move you." "I know. I was ready to walk off that stage, Dad. I swear to God. I was 2 seconds from grabbing that mic." Solomon reached out, placing a steady hand on his son's shoulder. "And that's exactly why you didn't." Tyron frowned. "What do you mean?" "Because you knew I could handle it. And because you handled your moment like a man. You didn't let anyone steal it from you." Tyron looked down, letting that sink in. Then he glanced up at the figures clustered near the gym exit. 6 men, quiet, composed, not seeking recognition. Just there, watching. "Who were those guys?" he asked. Solomon followed his gaze. "Men I bled with. Men who understand loyalty. Who don't forget." Tyron nodded slowly. "That was powerful." "It was necessary," Solomon replied. "Sometimes silence is louder than shouting. Sometimes just standing says more than 1,000 words." They stood like that, shoulder to shoulder. Not just father and son anymore, but 2 men bound by something beyond blood. A legacy. Near the parking lot, Creed raised his hand, not to wave, just a silent gesture of respect. Tyron returned it instinctively, understanding now. The crowd continued to melt away. Balloons deflated. Folding chairs were packed into trunks. The gym, the banners, the whole pageant of celebration was winding down. But one moment still remained. As they walked to the car, a weathered black Dodge Charger once driven by Tyron's mother to every parent-teacher meeting, baseball game, and late-night emergency snack run. Tyron ran his fingers along a scratch near the handle. "She would have been screaming the loudest today," he said softly. "She would have made you retake every photo until your smile looked just right," Solomon replied, finally smiling. They got in and closed the doors. The car was warm from the sun, but it felt like a cocoon, a place where time stopped. Tyron turned toward his father. "I gotta ask," he said. "Why didn't you say anything to those guards? You just sat there." Solomon tapped the steering wheel once. "Because I don't have to stand up for who I am. And I don't need to raise my voice to be heard." Tyron leaned back, chewing on that. "You know how many times in my life I've had to choose between letting something slide or blowing it up?" Solomon asked. "That moment today? It wasn't new. But how we respond, that's what defines us." "They disrespected you," Tyron said. "In front of everybody." "Yes," Solomon said. "And everyone saw it. But they also saw the truth. They saw 6 men who didn't need an invitation. They stood because they understood. That moment wasn't just about me, it was about what we stand for." Tyron went quiet. Solomon reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded photo. His wife holding newborn Tyron in her arms. "I carried this through Kandahar. Through losing your mom. Through every dark place I ever went. Not because it gave me strength, because it reminded me what's worth protecting." Tyron's voice lowered. "You always knew who had your back." "I didn't need to know," Solomon said. "I just had faith. Real men don't vanish when things get uncomfortable. They show up. And they stand." A pause. Then Tyron whispered, "I want to be like that. Like you." Solomon turned to him. "You already are. You walked that stage with pride. You didn't let anger steal your moment. You stayed grounded even when everything around you was trying to throw you off balance." Outside, the last of the SEALs were getting into their cars. Creed looked toward the Charger one last time, offering a final nod of respect. No words, just a silent acknowledgement. Tyron watched them drive off, then leaned back in his seat. "So what now?" Solomon turned the key. The Charger rumbled to life. "Now we drive home. And you get to choose dinner." Tyron grinned. "Waffle House." Solomon chuckled. "Of course." They pulled out of the lot. The school shrank in the rearview mirror. But what had happened inside that gym wouldn't fade with distance. Not for them. Not for anyone who had witnessed it. Because that day for Tyron marked something far deeper than a graduation. It marked the moment he understood that manhood isn't built on volume, bravado, or retaliation. It's built on presence, on poise, on the quiet strength of knowing who you are and never needing to shout it. Some people scream to be seen. Others sit in silence and are never forgotten. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded of what true strength looks like. Subscribe for more powerful stories of character, courage, and quiet dignity.